Welcome back. You may have noticed that throughout this course, I've been giving examples from both tabletop and video games. There's a reason for this. Game design is game design regardless of medium, so a lot of the core principles are the same whether you're designing for digital games or physical ones. Also, as we've talked about in rapid prototyping, it's faster and cheaper and easier to make a tabletop game than a video game. So a lot of designers practice their craft on tabletop. Many game design degree programs at universities throughout the world start on tabletop for these reasons and more. Last time we talked about different kinds of design documentation, but today I'd like to talk about a special kind of documentation, the kind that's read by the player rather than the development team. I'm talking about writing rules for tabletop games. Now, this skill does carry over somewhat to video games when it comes to writing in-game tutorial text, or if you want to be really retro, instruction manuals. But the benefit to writing rules for tabletop games is that unlike most forms of documentation, there's actually something of a template for this, and it works way better than you'd expect.
Now, if you happen to own any board games or card games that come with a rule sheet, I'd encourage you to find them and actually read through them. You'll see that rules reading is actually a skill. These are not always easy to parse, and many rule sheets are written badly. Or if it is written well, and you learn the game by being taught from someone else, it's very possible that you learned the game wrong, and you'll discover that you've been playing the game wrong for years, and that the person who taught you how to play was playing it wrong too. This has happened to me personally so many times that it's really a pattern. So when I am personally learning a new board game, I always read the actual printed rules when I can. Partly to study how the rules are written, because I'm a game designer and I always want to see more examples of design writing, whether it's a good or bad example. And partly because I just don't trust other people to teach the rules properly at this point. And if you don't believe me that people get the rules wrong on a regular basis, just take the game Monopoly as an example. If you're watching these videos, chances are at some point in your life you've played Monopoly, and chances are you've learned to play from someone else teaching you rather than reading the rules, and chances are that the way you learned is different from how the actual printed rules work in multiple ways. Here's a common example. What happens in the game Monopoly if you land on free parking? According to the printed rules, the answer is absolutely nothing. It's a free space, you land there, you don't pay anyone any money, you don't receive any money, it is just a blank null space. But it is very common for people to play with a house rule where landing on free parking gives you money, either from the bank or from other players or from a pool of money built from what other players lose when they have to pay something to the bank. That's a house rule. It is not in the official rules of the game at all. And there's actually a good design reason why this isn't in the rules of the game. The objective of the game is to bankrupt your opponents. You win when everyone else runs out of money. So injecting more money randomly into the game economy makes it harder for players to achieve that goal. This house rule is a big reason why Monopoly has the reputation of taking forever to end. Because players are gaining far more money than they're losing, the economy is growing, and yet the goal is to bankrupt your opponents. This house rule is terrible game design, but you can't blame the game designer for this one because it's not actually in the rules. Here's another example. What happens in Monopoly if you land on an unowned property? You probably think, oh, you're given the choice to buy the property for the listed value on the board or not. And that part is correct. So if you thought that, you were playing the game properly. But what happens if you choose not to buy it? If you're like most people, the answer that you've learned is nothing happens. You just end your turn or roll again if you roll doubles. In the printed rules, if you land on a property and choose not to buy it, it goes up for auction, starting with half of its printed value on the board as an opening bid. And this is an open auction where anyone at the table, any player can call out any bid that is higher than the previous bid. The rules even state that at the beginning of the game, one player should be chosen as the auctioneer to act as a kind of MC when auctions happen. And that player holds no power, they're just there to keep the game moving. They're just given this responsibility. The auction rules are actually really interesting and provide an extra dimension to the game. If other players are cash poor, you could choose to send a property to auction in the hopes of buying it more cheaply than the printed board price, because no one else can afford to outbid you. Or if other players have a lot of cash, you might force a key property to auction in the hopes that other players enter a bidding war, and someone has to pay far more than it's actually worth. Despite this being a really interesting rule that adds Some much needed player-player interactions to the game. Almost no one actually plays this way outside of official tournaments. So you might ask, well, why have you been playing Monopoly wrong all these years? And the answer is, most people learn Monopoly from being taught by someone else, not from reading and following the printed rules. And Monopoly has been around for so long that, like a game of human telephone, so many people have described the rules to so many other people, with details getting slightly changed over time, that the way people play has drifted away from the way it was originally designed. So that's your first lesson as a game designer. Most of your players don't read. I mean, they can read, of course, but given any alternative, they will choose not to. At any rate, if you ever design a board game, at some point you will need to write the rules out because your players need to know how to play. And as my colleague and dear friend Brenda Romero has told me many times before, we don't ship a game designer in the box. So, how do you write the rules so that someone reading them will understand? The first thing to understand is the rules format, and if you do read a bunch of rule sheets from existing games, you'll start to see some common patterns. At the very top of the first page of the rules document is probably going to be the name of the game. This seems pretty obvious. If the rules are outside the box, someone can immediately figure out which game they belong to. Sometimes the rules will give additional information like total number of players, player age guidelines like 8 years and up, or expected playtime. Sometimes this is left out of the rule sheet and just is printed on the game box instead, but the name is always there. Next on the front page is usually a paragraph or two introducing the thematic elements of the game. Where's this game taking place? Who are the players? What do they represent? What's their goal? Not the mechanical goal, but the conceptual goal within the narrative framing of the game, right? What's my motivation as the player? The theme is usually put in italics because putting a single word in italics emphasizes it, but an entire paragraph in italics actually does the opposite. It removes emphasis. An entire paragraph in italics is a way of telling the reader, this is flavor text. It's not really important to understanding the rules. You can skip this if you want, and you'll lose nothing. It doesn't have to be in italics, but doing so is very common in order to just let the player know that they can skip this unless they really want to know the theme. I'll give you an example of what a thematic introduction looks like from an actual published tabletop game. You are a monarch, like your parents before you, a ruler of a small, pleasant kingdom of rivers and evergreens. Unlike your parents, however, you have hopes and dreams. You want a bigger and more pleasant kingdom with more rivers and a wider variety of trees. You want a dominion. In all directions lie fiefs, freeholds, and feuddoms. All are small bits of land controlled by petty lords verging on anarchy. You will bring civilization to these people, uniting them under your banner. But wait, it must be something in the air. Several other monarchs have had the exact same idea. You must race to get as much of the unclaimed land as possible, fending them off along the way. To do this, you'll hire minions, construct buildings, spruce up your castle, and fill your treasury. Your parents wouldn't be proud, but your grandparents on your mother's side would be delighted. Do you recognize this? So this is from an actual tabletop game. It's actually a Game of the Year, a Spiel des Jahres winner called Dominion. If you've played Dominion, you may be surprised to know it has any story at all. The game has a very light medieval fantasy theme, but is very abstract. The game was actually the first game in the genre that we know today as deck builders, where you start with a small pre-constructed deck, and then on your turn you draw some cards from your deck, play them, and then acquire other cards to go into your deck. Dominion is a game where cards give you coins, and you use coins to buy more cards, and some cards just give you even more coins, or let you thin your deck by removing low-value cards so your future card draws are more efficient on average, or some cards are victory point cards that do nothing for you other than dilute your deck, except that those are what matter for your final score at the end of the game. There's absolutely nothing in the game to suggest that you're a monarch of a kingdom concerned with imperialist expansion, except for these 2 paragraphs in the rules. But they are there in case someone wants to know, what's my motivation? Once that's out of the way, so that players have a conceptual framework for understanding the rules, the next thing usually listed is a complete list of components in the box. And this is usually not just text, but also images showing what the components look like. This does 2 things. First, by providing a complete list, it lets the reader make sure that everything is in the box and nothing is missing. That can be a concern if you play the game a lot and worry one of the pieces might have gotten lost, or if you haven't played the game in a long time, or you're just picking it up at a secondhand store and want to make sure everything is there before you buy it. Second, it's also an efficient way to label different parts of the game. So if, for example, you have 3 different card decks with different backs, this is where you can give those different decks their own names so that you can refer to them in the rest of the rules and the player will know which deck you're talking about. You'll notice we still haven't gotten to the actual rules yet, and we're already 3 sections into the rules document. There's a lot of background to get out of the way up front. Now we start with the rules, and we start off with a very simple summary of the object of the game. You might think it's strange to start with the final objective when players don't even know how to play yet, but this is put up front to help players understand why they should care about why any given rule exists. If one of the rules is that you can play a draw 2 card to force an opponent to draw 2 cards, you might wonder why you'd want to do that. Are more cards good or bad? But if you know that the object of the game is to be the first player to get rid of all your cards, like in the card game Uno, then forcing an opponent to draw cards is a clear attack that takes them further from their goal, so now you have the context to understand why that rule is there, which makes it easier to remember. I find this useful when I'm teaching the rules of the game to players who haven't played before too, or when explaining my own game in a playtest. I usually start by saying, the object of the game is to win, and you do that by whatever the goal is, because that usually gets at least a small chuckle out of people. At any rate, you don't have to go into great detail here, just a general idea of what players are trying to do. If the goal is to have the most victory points at the end of the game, just say that. You don't need to tell players how victory points are earned yet, you'll get to that later, just that they understand that victory points are important. Next, we go more or less in chronological order, starting with setup. What do you have to do before the game starts? This usually involves separating out game components, shuffling decks of cards, giving players some starting resources, and determining who goes first if it's a turn-based game, for example. After that are the rules of the actual play of the game after it starts. This is usually the lengthiest section of the rules, and also the section whose format is the most different between different games. If a game is played in turns, you'll usually see that stated up front, and then it'll show what happens on a turn in what order. Sometimes turns are divided into phases that are played in order. Sometimes a player can take any of several actions on their turn, but can take them in any order. So you'd start by explaining the overall format of the turn, and then explaining the actions themselves. If a game is played in real time, you'd start by saying that up front, and then describe what actions players can take and when. The last section involving rules is resolution. What are the conditions that end the game? And when the game does end, how do you determine the outcome, like a winner? Sometimes these rules are very simple. The game ends immediately when a player achieves the victory condition and that player wins. For example, in Monopoly, the goal of the game is to eliminate all your opponents by bankrupting them, and you win as soon as you accomplish that goal. Sometimes the rules of resolution are more intricate. In Dominion, the game has a number of piles of cards in the center of the table that people can buy to add to their decks, and the game ends when either the pile of cards called provinces is empty, or when any other 3 piles are empty. And to determine a winner, you have to count up the face value of all victory point cards in your hand, and your deck and your discard pile, and the highest total wins. Not all rules have any appendices, but some do based on what's appropriate for that game. If your game has a lot of cards with special rules that need to be explained more thoroughly in the rules document, or if your game uses icons or keywords that need to be defined in a glossary, or if you have a set of frequently asked questions during playtest where you couldn't find a way to write the rules more clearly, but you felt you should include these in the rules somewhere in their own section, or if there's some data or stats in the game that make a difference for strategy that players should know, like the frequency of how many copies of each card are in a common deck, those kinds of things would usually go at the end of the rules, because an experienced player that already knows the rules, that just needs to look up something for quick reference, can just look and find it right on the back page without having to flip through the rules and do a complete search of the entire document. Lastly, for professionally printed games, you'll usually see at the very end of the last page a list of credits of who worked on the game and in what capacity, who were the designers, who provided the art, who playtested the game, stuff like that. It's generally a nice gesture to give credit to everyone who helped you make the game, and it costs you basically nothing to acknowledge them, just a few printed words in the end of the rules. This is also true with video games, by the way, which is why it's so common to have a credit screen right off the main menu. It's something most players of the game will ignore, but it's important to the people working on it who can point to their name and say, "See, I made part of this." Also, once you're in the industry and know a lot of professionals, you tend to look at the credits of every game you play just because it's a small industry, and chances are that for any given game, you might actually recognize some of the names as people you've worked with or met before, or at least have heard of. If you're just making a prototype, you don't generally include this, but you should probably keep a list of names of people who have helped you with the art, the design, or the playtesting somewhere so that you could credit them later if this ever gets public. And that's it. Those are the rules. If you write the rules in these sections in this order, it'll give you the best chance of having your rules be understood when someone reads them. Now, there are a few more things that you should know when writing rules. First of all, when you're describing a thing, unless it's very straightforward and obvious, give one or more examples. If, for example, you've got rules about how players are allowed to place tokens on the board and some placements are legal but others aren't, show examples of what is and isn't allowed. This example here is from a board game called Blockus, which has pretty simple placement rules. You must place your first tile overlapping a corner of the board, and all other tiles have to be placed diagonally but not orthogonally adjacent to one of your other pieces. And you see here they show examples of both of these. Also on that subject, notice that the examples include pictures. I know it's tempting to write everything in plain text so you don't have to actually draw anything, but the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words is very true in rules writing. Diagrams and pictures do two things. First is that it's often just easier to understand a picture, so it can get the point across faster. There's another reason too. Long blocks of text are intimidating to most people, so if you have an entire page of just text with no pictures, most of your readers will skim or they'll skip it entirely because their brain sees a giant wall of text and their brain's first instinct is to go, no, I don't want to read that. TLDR, your players came here to play a game, not to read a book. This is true with video game narrative too, by the way. Even for story-heavy video games, dialogue and exposition is usually a lot shorter than you would think. By breaking the text up with diagrams, you make it seem easier to read. And this is totally just a psychological trick, but it is one that works really well. I'd recommend making sure that there's at least one picture or diagram on every page of the rules. If you have literally no reason to include a diagram to clarify anything, at least put some kind of graphic, like a concept drawing of one of the characters in the game or something like that, just to break up the text. Now, you might remember I said the same thing last time when talking about writing design docs. Yeah, the rest of your dev team doesn't like to read any more than your players do. Professional rules writers will do just about anything they can, including restructuring major sections of the rules to avoid a forward reference. Forward references are where your game rules booklet uses some terminology or makes reference to a mechanic or a thing that's only defined later on in the rules and not earlier. Now, this makes sense. If you're a player reading a set of rules and you run into an unfamiliar term, your first instinct is to stop and say, wait, what is that thing? What does it mean? And you might think you missed an important definition earlier, so then you'll have to go back and reread all the rules to make sure you didn't miss something, and then you'll still be confused until you get to the section that finally defines that thing. Even if it's just the very next sentence or paragraph, reading something undefined can still make the reader very nervous that they're missing something. So if you have to include a reference to a key term or mechanic or something, make sure it's defined earlier, not later. Next one, test your rules as rigorously as you test your mechanics. Even if your game is fun and meets its design goals, no one will know that if they don't understand how to play. So you need to make sure your rules are clear, and the way you do that is to playtest your rules for comprehension. For this type of playtest, you just give your playtesters the rule sheet and don't bother explaining anything yourself. See what they can figure out and what's unclear. And prepare yourself emotionally for this kind of playtest, because I pretty much guarantee the first time that you playtest your rules with a new game, your players will misunderstand at least one major thing because the rules were worded in a strange way, or they'll ignore a rule because you forgot to write it down anywhere, and this will be excruciating. It'll be actively painful to see people misinterpret your rules and play your game wrong. Just remember, the point of a playtest is to find problems, and when it comes to the rules and players' ability to play your game without you there, you really want to make sure your players can do that. And lastly, be consistent in your terminology throughout your rules document. This can sometimes be harder than it seems, because sometimes there are synonyms. And if you have a deck of item cards and sometimes you refer to them as cards and other times you call them items, players might see two different words and think they're referring to two different things. So just pick a term and use it constantly throughout. This works with your design documentation as well. So if you want to know more tips about rulebook writing, just typing how to write good board game rules or something similar into a search engine will find you tons of articles, podcasts, and videos that will generally all give good advice that's similar to what I've told you here. It might include a little something extra if you want to just hear this from another source. I've included two other links here. The first is Board Game Geek, which is a well-known site for looking up information on tabletop games of all kinds. It has a wonderful advanced search feature that is fantastic for game design research. You can search their database of games by mechanic, theme, by designer, by publisher, publication date, or a bunch of other things. If you see something on there like, say, a mechanic you can search for and you don't even know what that mechanic means, like, one of the mechanics I think you can search for is a rondel. If you don't know what a rondel is, just search on it and look at a few games and you'll probably figure out what it means pretty quickly. But aside from that, another great feature of the site is that nearly all of the game entries include a downloadable PDF of the rules. Now, you do have to create an account on their site to access this feature, but accounts are free, so you may as well. And then after that, you can read through a variety of rulebooks for whatever games you want. And as you're reading, pay attention to what rulebooks you like and which ones you don't and why. What's easy to understand? What's hard to understand? What's fun to read through? What's so boring that you cannot make it through? The more rulebooks you read, the better you'll get at writing them, because you'll understand how they are generally written, what makes them good or bad, also the kinds of features that make them better or worse, or for understanding. The second link here is a site that also has pages for a lot of popular games, but it doesn't include the official printed rules of the publisher the way that Board Game Geek does. Instead, the second link provides a rule summary, which is generally a lot shorter and in many cases better written than the original rulebook. It can be really interesting exercise to look up a game on Order of Gamers and read through their rule summary, and then get a PDF of the original rules from Board Game Geek and compare them side by side. Who used fewer words? Which rules were clearer? Was anything missing on one or the other? This can really help you think about how to make your rules as short and concise as possible without losing meaning.
And with that, we come to the end of another module. So as I'm sure you're expecting me to say by now, go take your assessment so you can get your certification from HP Gaming Garage. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video where we talk about other types of communication that we haven't covered yet.